Live now. Just wait for it to connect. Wait for it. Okay. And it's all right. We're good. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Muhammad. I'm the executive director here at the Jerusalem Fund. I'm delighted to join Dagmar Painter and welcome you, curator Dagmar Painter, excuse me, and welcoming you to Gallery Al-Quds' first Zoom conversation about the current art show, which is called Invisibly Present, Visibly Absent. Dagmar will be talking to the artist, Sam Husseini. The exhibition is visible online and can be accessed through the Jerusalem Fund's website. And later it will be open by limited appointments in the end of September. So a little bit about Sam. Sam Husseini was born Osama Husseini in Amman, Jordan, to a Palestinian father and a Jordanian mother. And he is an artist and writer currently living in Riverdale, Maryland. During the late 1980s, after receiving a degree in math and philosophy from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, he took sculpture classes in New York City. His interests in art continued in the following years and included photography in Washington, D.C., especially of the effects of nature on the metro system in his Concrete Expressionism series, as well as during trips outside the US, including in Palestine. However, absorbed in media and politics, his painting and sculptural output was minimal until 2014, after moving to Riverdale. He makes connections between his artistic and political work, seeking to reconcile the natural with the artificial in much of the former, and East with West in aspects of the latter. Similarly, he writes of seeing layers of lies in the political realm and layers of beauty in art and nature. And now I'm going to give it off to Dagmar, who will give another brief intro, and then we'll move on to Sam.
Thank you, Mohammed. Hi, Sam. Good to see you. We're looking forward to this discussion. And hello to all our viewers. We are talking about an exhibition that's called Invisibly Present, Visibly Absent, and that's actually what it is. There are over 70 images, paintings, and works on paper and sculpture that are actually physically in Gallery Al-Quds at the moment as we speak. But they are certainly invisibly present, and for us, for the moment, visibly absent. They are available online, as Mohammed said, and we will also have a online catalog that we can email you. And ultimately, you will be able to make appointments to come and see the show. Now, for this talk, we're going to just show you some very limited number of the major pieces in the exhibition. And we'll talk a little bit about what they mean and also about technique. We're going to talk a lot about the issues about nature, the environment, politics, and Palestine. The show is really also about dispossession. The refugee experience for Palestinians, they are invisibly present, invisibly absent so often in the situation in Palestine, with lost villages, with people not being able to return to their homes, and even the people who are living there, for so many reasons, they are invisibly present in terms of lack of rights. Let's go right away to one of the first pieces from Sam Husseini, and we'll talk about each individual piece and move on from there. Let me see if I can share my screen with you. And there we are. All right, our first piece is called Manna from Heaven. Sam, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. In terms of technique, I take natural forms that literally drop down like manna in heaven, like the samaras, what people usually call helicopters dropping down, and there's dandelion in the top right. And as I layer each type of flora, I add a layer of paint to it. I like to think of my art as, so much traditional art I would liken to a rowboat. It's stroke, stroke, stroke. And a lot of modern art is like a motorboat. It's automated at some level quite frequently. In my art, I try to liken it to a sailboat. I'm trying to work with nature. I'm not trying to control the wind. I'm not trying to manipulate the wind. Whatever we're given by nature, by creation, we should do what we can with it. And in that sense, it's like manna from heaven. It's, be like lilies of the valley, birds in the trees, and to use what's given rather than constant manipulation. I'm not going to say too much about this. This is just, to me, a very good example of this type that I did. And the glorious dream can either be, that dream that you had this morning that you didn't remember until something happened, or it can be an ancient dream or a dream from your childhood. And that's the meaning of that title to me. Fruits of Cancer is another with a similar technique where I place flora on a canvas. The title refers to the origin of my starting to do art again. It's largely came out of two things having to do with my relationship with my partner, Emily. One is I got my weekends back. Instead of chasing politicians around, questioning them on the weekend as they got out of the Sunday talk shows, I started staying at home and occasionally going on road trips and reconnecting with nature around DC, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, the Carolinas. And then she got cancer quite early on in our relationship. And I remember being very aggravated at one point while we were at some state park. It was colorectal cancer, so she had to be in the bathroom for like an hour. And what do you do with that? And eventually it was like, well, you treat it like manna from heaven. It's a gift, and you can actually use that time instead of looking at your phone or being frustrated. My gosh, I'm in the middle of creation. This is beautiful. I should not just immerse myself in it and look at it, but also allow it to flourish, to actually get things out of my head and onto paper. And that's what I started doing. So in a sense, a lot of my work is the fruits of those two strands of our relationship.
Sam, this one, gain of function, I'd like you to talk a little bit more about this piece, because it's very interesting. You, in the labels that we have on the main catalog and in the work at the gallery, you talk about the concept of gain of function, which is a scientific concept where lab pathogens can be made more, lethal ones can be made more easily transmissible through this lab technique. And that seems to me a real metaphor for what's going on now with the virus situation, the pandemic, and also, as you like to say, for the accumulation of power. So talk a little bit about your concept for gain of function.
Sure. Just the standard in terms of the political realm, it's sort of a euphemism for what's also called in some of the scientific literature potentially pandemic pathogens. And the US significantly really got going on this in 2001. I hope people recall, not only did the 9/11 attacks happen, but then there were the anthrax attacks. The anthrax attacks were what you would call a false flag. They came, somebody sent envelopes to media, to members of Congress, shut down much of the major institutions for weeks on end. That's when the Bush administration ran through the Patriot Act and so on. And the envelopes had a piece of paper that said, "Praise to Allah, death to America, death to Israel." And tons of media outlets and great media luminaries use this to build up the case for war following 9/11. They ended up coming out of a US lab. The US government now concedes that, although they're trying to pin it on one individual. But the other outcome of this was a dramatic increase in this type of dangerous lab work, where you attempt, in the name of preventing what the terrorists or what nature can throw at us, and they're the two others, the bad guys and nature. They're the threats to us, and we, major institutions, give us billions and billions of dollars. Over $100 million has been spent on so-called bio defense since 9/11, and as we see, a lot of good it's done us, and potentially a lot of harm it's done us. In that there's been a flourishing of this dangerous lab work. I've investigated deeply. This piece was done, unlike the other three, this year as I was investigating this type of work and the origins of the current pandemic. And it's become a deformed debate in the United States. A lot of people are simply pointing to China and the labs in Wuhan and turning it into an anti-Chinese thing, that othering the Chinese, whereas what I'm saying is quite distinct, saying this has been a US-driven biowarfare effort that other countries are simply trying to catch on to, and in effect violating international law with what the US has done, and China and Russia, France, Israel never signed the treaty, so they've been doing this kind of work, and they don't even need the pretense that the US has of saying, oh, we're only doing this for defensive purposes. We're creating more dangerous things so that we can figure out how to defend against them. That's the US line. And this piece, it's sort of reflective in that I'm manipulating nature here too. And I'm doing it on a larger scale. Physically, it's a larger canvas. It's a canvas, not paper like the other ones. And also, I stop manipulating nature myself and just, they're all one piece. For example, the red that you see, the heart-shaped ones, those are all redbud or prater trees, as I call them. The purple is all a chestnut tree, and it's all one piece laid down. It's not me saying, oh, where should they go? It's me allowing nature to speak, and sort of being self-reflective in letting that happen, and what should, to what extent should I be manipulating things? And that is what our true function should be. That's the kind of function that we do need to gain in.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things I want to point out to our viewers too is you'll be noticing as we move on with these, they're all very beautiful. And it's an interesting idea to talk about very difficult subjects, but present them in a manner that makes you want to look and want to read and want to learn about them. And I always have a little saying that I like to use all the time, which is, you have to look before you can see. So if the artwork doesn't engage you in a way that makes you want to look at it, you ultimately are not going to be spending any time learning what it's about. And almost all of these pieces are like that, in the sense that at first you look at them on the surface and you just see beauty and a kind of an abstraction. And then later on, you can find out more about the meaning behind the work. Let's move on. This is called Executing Birth.
This is a very personal, sorry.
Go ahead.
This is a very personal piece, and there's a write-up in the catalog I won't go into. I mostly put it here just simply to show the contrast in terms of the technique. Most of the flora is spread around by myself, but it's dominated by a weeping willow. And so it's like a first big structure holding a larger piece together. But that's a very personal piece. It relates to Palestine, and it's written about in the catalog. This is Future Flag, and I think the longer title is, a risen bird eats the maggots that were feeding off of it. And that's literally what happened. I found a dead bird and I decided to incorporate it into a piece with the flora. And there are actually, if you see it in real life, you can see the feathers are still on it at the bottom there. And several of these pieces in gain of function, there's still tiny bits of flora on the canvas. But here there's actually maggots and the trail of maggots, especially around the mouth. That's just how it happened to land, and it just happened to look exactly like that. That's what was happening. So it's about, a great creature ultimately falling, doomed to, quote unquote, lesser life forms. This similarly, it has a bird with flora, but it's a very different theme. This was based on a challenge that you, Dagmar, sent out. And I want to say, I meant to say at the beginning, I want to thank the staff and the board of the Jerusalem Fund for this, especially Mohammed, especially you, Dagmar, for seeing this through. This was my first exhibit, and I'm sure it was challenging for a curator. So thank you so much. But this was a challenge that you put out, a poem by, was his name Mohammed?
Yeah. Yes. Scott Mohammed, yeah, and Native American.
And it was a beautiful poem, and I was struggling with what to do with it. But ironically, the line that jumped out at me was an eagle playing with the wind. And it kind of reminded me of some political figures who sort of oversell themselves. So it's actually not an eagle. It is roadkill that I found by the side of a road. I think it's a buzzard. It could be a hawk. And I used it as a template to do this. And the underlying message is a lot of people or political pontificators are actually roadkill, but making grand proclamations as to what they are or what they're doing. This is obviously not made with flora, it's made with snow. In terms of the technique here, what I do, I don't know if you can go to the next one. Do
you want to go to one of the snow ones, the close-up?
This is a snow one. No, not a close-up. No. Just the next one actually shows the technique. I'm sorry.
No, this is work in progress.
Yes, I know, but it shows how I do a piece like that. As the snow is falling on a cold winter night, while everyone else is at home in their nice warm bedrooms, I'm often out spraying a canvas as the snow falls over and over and over again, layer by layer. I'll spray another color, I'll spray another color, I'll spray another color until it can be 6 inches or more deep. And then when it dries, it becomes, if we can go back, I'm sorry. It breaks up. Sometimes I got to give it a whack or two, and it creates these forms. This piece is based on a story of what happened to me after 9/11, the scorching sun which brings them forth. I, of course, doing political media work was, engrossed in doing that. After 9/11, worked nonstop, and then I had to drop a friend off to Union Station and was sort of in a state of collapse, walked around in the area and went to the Library of Congress and sunk into one of the chairs, looked up, and there was a quote there that said, "We taste the spices of Arabia and never feel the scorching sun which brings them forth." And it's by a British lord, Dudley North, who was associated with the East India Trading Company, as if boasting that we can do all these wonders and make all of this profit and never feel the scorching sun which brings them forth. So that's a piece about the immediate aftermath and the personal aftermath after 9/11. I'm not going to talk about this piece too much. I just want to show this as another example of a particularly well executed snow piece.
Sam, you in a lot of your pieces you like double meanings, and so Cradle is also a piece that rests on a double meaning. So if you'd like to tell us about Cradle as a noun and Cradle as a verb.
This piece, as I said, it's a snow piece, and they're heavy when you try to finally bring them to the house so that they melt. And as I was carrying it, it started to break. And so I was literally cradling it in my arms. And the title came to me immediately. And it also broke along two lines that immediately reminded me of the Tigris and Euphrates, the Cradle of Civilization. And the title came to me. Sometimes I have to think long and deep about what I'm really trying to say here. This one came to me in a flash. And yeah, it's both a noun and a verb.
We have a great close-up of a snow piece as well. And the story of this piece is also very interesting and relationship with Palestine as well.
This piece, I mean, it's called Umm Matthew or From Umm Matthew. And what's different about this piece than the most of the other snow pieces is it's on metal. And I believe that this facilitated, it was the first piece that I was able to make that had both this breakup pattern, which I view as sort of an emotional release, and actual snowflakes, which you can see on the detail image there. They're actually preserved, petrified in that form. And the story behind this, Palestine runs as a subtext through much of these. The story behind this piece is that I was on one of my road trips with my partner, Emily, and we were visiting the parent of Matthew, a childhood friend of hers who had committed suicide. He had AIDS. He had some other tragedies befall him. And while we were talking with his mom in her backyard, I noticed these metal plates. And I said, what's up with those? And she said, oh, he was doing art and he was going to do something with them. I don't know what. And Emily says, Sam's doing art. And she's like, please take them. Please, do something beautiful with these. And so, if it weren't, and so eventually I decided to do snow pieces on them. And I don't think if it wasn't for this and doing it on metal, I probably wouldn't have figured out, how to be doing, frozen snowflakes on larger snow pieces. So that's most of the story behind that one. And here, there's a detailed write-up of this piece, but there you're pointing to a petrified, what I call it, snow piece, a snowflake. And it's affixed to a matchbox from a Russian restaurant I got when I was in Helsinki. I attempted to ask Trump and Putin at the famed Helsinki summit in 2018 about both the nuclear weapon ban treaty, which 122 countries backed, and the US mostly, and also Russia, prevent, as well as the US's non-acknowledgement of the threat of Israel's massive nuclear arsenal that the US government refuses to acknowledge. Anytime you see a US government official, ask them, do you acknowledge Israel's nuclear weapons? And you'll get all kinds of amusing results from that. And of course, the yellow star is both to indicate the Nazi murderous assault of Jews, as well as the individuality of each human being. It's a cliche, but it's a true cliche, as well as a spark for a threatening tinderbox. This is the first piece that has no natural forms, but it looks natural. It's a evaporator from an air conditioning unit, layered over and over with with acrylic paint. You can't get more artificial than acrylic paint. I talk all about nature, and here I am. I'm using acrylic paint most of the time, which is basically plastic, and then sanded down, and you get these beautiful forms. And it's about the artificiality of even the air that we breathe. And this was done last year in 2019, but it resonates now, I believe, with the pandemic and with the threats of how we live and breathe being so dissociated with nature in many respects.
It's especially interesting to me because if you see the piece in real life, which I hope many of you will be able to do, I really thought it was a log when I first saw it. It's heavy and it has a rectangular form. And with all of these layers on top of it, it really looked like bark that you had somehow managed to layer and paint over and over again. And then the way that bark tends to deteriorate on old logs. So the irony of this being something made of metal and plastic, and yet having this relationship with nature, because without trees, we're not going to be able to do much breathing. And yet this was a machine that is supposed to help us breathe at the same time. So I like this piece a lot. I think there's a lot of interesting irony with this piece. Okay. And I would get to actual wood.
Yes. And there's, again, a detailed write-up of this, and I know we're tight on time. So continuity of government is a phrase that came out during the Iran-Contra hearings of plans to suspend the US Constitution. And at the time—
which people are talking about right now.
Correct. Which at the time hit me like a wooden 2x4. So this piece is on the other side of it about building government from nature, and that should be an actual government, so to speak. Similarly, this piece, Resolver, is it's a beer can that has been layered over and over again. And it's about the consequences of not being attuned with nature, that is, soothing oneself with addictive substances or other addictive habits. And yet the thing itself, a crushed beer can, if you look at it, can really be beautiful. And just seeing reality for what it is. This is simply paint on a window.
It's a real window. I mean, you can see that the frame around it, but it actually is glass. Yes.
And it's about completely letting go and letting nature take over. It's hard to say that I did anything here. I simply let nature and tried to put myself in being attuned to the beautiful patterns. So much of nature is an annoyance to us. I gotta mow the lawn. I gotta rake the leaves. I gotta scrape the car, the frost off the windshield. I gotta shovel the snow. Well, all of these things are beautiful. And this was inspired by the beauty of the frost on my windshield.
When you made this, when you saw the frost initially, was this daytime or at night?
You mean when I made this piece, or when I?
Yeah, I mean when it started off. I mean, because we're really interested in knowing how you preserved this. This is obviously a close-up of what the frost looks like. But we've all seen this kind of frost on for example, our car windshields, or if the heat isn't really great in our houses, we've seen them on the outside of our windows. So you encountered this with your window, and at that point it was white, I guess, frost colored. And then you applied what, spray, or how did you do it?
Okay, well, I mean, maybe I'm underselling myself. I mean, this was a very intentional process on my part. I went out to get a window and bought paint for this purpose.
Mhm.
And some cold night or afternoon, I poured it into the, because, it has edges, so you can sort of pour it in there and it'll hold. And then as it froze, it created these patterns, and they changed over time. So it was kind of a trick, is to say, okay, it's done. Let's bring it inside and hope that it doesn't change anymore. So that was the process.
It's a little bit of a frozen Jackson Pollock.
Yeah. And
okay, I want to make a comment here. Some of you have probably noticed by now that in our little windows that we're living in now, we have our names on them. And Sam's name says Hennessy.
Oh, I meant to change.
And so, but there's a story with that. And it also relates to the piece of art that we're going to be looking at in a moment. So Sam, do you want to tell us a little bit? It's kind of a really good story because it shows a little bit about the older generation of Palestinians and their, their issues with trying to come to the United States, assimilate in a way that today maybe we look at in a different way. And the protectiveness of family. There's a lot to this story. So tell us a little bit about the story, and then we'll be able to look at what you did with this.
Well, just on that, in the vase piece, my father, when I became a U.S. citizen, he had changed his name and urged me to change my name from Usama Farid Husseini to Samuel Frank Hennessy. And that's still my legal name. I started writing as Sam Husseini during the buildup of the Iraq War in 1990. So you can see the Hennessy glass in there from Hennessy Cognac. This piece, I wish I got a better detail of it, because it's evaporated water. It's lines and lines of water. I had put just a couple of drops of paint in each container, put them under light, had them evaporate, and then put them all together. And the line is a Rumi line, and it's sort of a ironic use of it. And it's a beautiful line. And when I say Rumi, the Rumi poetry that drives me is not the, oh, you're so beautiful, la 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 la. There's sort of there's an aspect of Rumi that addresses the troubled heart. And here he's urging people, don't just admire the vase, don't sit on the sideline, drink the water. And
I think it's a little bit of a get out the vote moment right now as well.
Don't get me started. I have all around, but and it's also somewhat Palestinian oriented in terms of water theft. My father's from Elabun, or has relatives in Elabun, which is in Galilee. My father was driven out in Tiberias, and I actually met folks who actually worked in some of the Israeli facilities that siphon off water from the Sea of Galilee away from the Jordan River, which has obvious negative consequences for the Palestinians living downstream. It's the broader ecological problem, and Palestinians as sort of the canary in the coal mine in terms of ecological devastation. Both in Tatters Together similarly has a Palestinian theme because of my love, as I think a lot of Palestinians, for olive trees. This was given to me as a challenge, rather like your poem, Dagmar. And it's not an olive tree, but it reminded me of olive trees, and it's spider webs in there that I painted. This was a very early piece, which is no paint here. it's literally what leaves left on a canvas. I put a canvas down, put leaves on top of it, and on a good day, those are the results you get after a rain. And you'll notice the last several pieces, I didn't do anything. I'm no longer categorizing pieces necessarily by technique, it's by philosophy. What leaves leave, or master's brushstrokes, I'm completely deferring to nature. It's kind of Taoist in that you aspire to be a master who does nothing but leaves nothing undone. Two iced Arabic coffees is an earlier frozen. This is on paper, so it predated the other ones that you see. And it's titled and inspired by, in large part, my memory of my mom and other Arabic women reading the bottom of an Arabic coffee cup, and telling your fortune with the intricate patterns there and what you see. And it's one of many dear childhood memories to me in terms of nature popping up in there. You don't have to go outside necessarily for nature. There it is. It speaks anywhere it can.
So tell us how you made this.
Oh, it's paint, and I frankly can't remember if it's acrylic or watercolor applied to canvas. And while I'm outside, I'm working outside here, and I'm probably frustrated that it's so cold and it's not snowing, because I really want to do a snow piece, but manna from heaven, whatever nature gives you, you do what you can. And so I used the cold to bring those patterns out. And again, originally inspired by just seeing the frost on windows.
So our last piece, Answer Key, is a very, very important piece because it is directly relating to Palestine and the Palestine question. We also have some really good close-ups of it. So as you start describing it, Sam, and talking about its philosophy, I will also show some of the close-ups as we go on. But the title itself, Answer Key, it relates in a way to being the answer, the key to the issues that we are confronting today, not only with Palestine, but with social justice politically in general. So you could expand on that, please.
I'd actually titled a couple of other pieces Answer Key in terms of letting the viewer see how it's made, which I do here, but it's also a title that works at another level here. And this notion that sort of seeing things through the lens of Palestine, seeing the general imperial trend of history over the last 500 years and viewing Palestine as sort of the last major tip of the spear of European settler colonialism, helps give you an answer key to geopolitics generally. It's in terms of technique on metal, and with paint that is frozen, and that's another sort of notion of Palestine, of being frozen in time, of the refugee experience and having lives upended and effectively having to be in the state of trying to figure out where things are, where they should go. It has invisibly absent a key, literally, and I layered the right side of the piece with slightly off colors of the Palestinian flag, red, green, white, and black, to make the point as evident as possible. And
there's the key.
Right
there.
Yeah, and the detail on this, I'm glad we, this piece in particular, I wanted to go out of my way to get pictures of the detail of it, because it is very beautiful, and it's a piece that, I unlike, it's sort of another level of the breathe and the other pieces where I take an object and layer it. Here I create an object, in effect, and layer it and then sand it down. And you get that effect.
And Sam, of course, for a lot of our viewers already know, but perhaps not all, the symbolism of the key is so profound.
Oh, sorry, I'm
for Palestinians, especially in the diaspora. Talk a little bit about that.
Of course, Palestinians in the diaspora associate the key with a going back to the homes that they were driven from, especially in 1948, where Israel conducted an ethnic cleansing campaign against Palestinians, including my father, was driven out from Tiberias. He was living in Tiberias, but in Elabun at the time, outside of a church where they were driven to Lebanon. And many Palestinians are said to have retained their keys to go back to their homes from that time. So that's a highly symbolic, highly Palestinian symbol.
And also now, especially with the latest political machinations that are going on in Palestine and Israel's new ideas, it's a question that I think a lot of people are asking these days, which is the key the answer? What is the key to the problem? And, there's a huge amount of discussion about annexation, about all of these things that are really coming to the fore at a very, very difficult time. Not that there's any time in Palestinian history that wasn't difficult, but especially with the pandemic and the ability of people in the diaspora to help support people who are still living in Gaza, for example, or in Palestine proper, in the West Bank area. All the occupied territories, you talk about this idea of what is the answer, what is the key to the question, especially in the use of this colors of the Palestinian flag. All of this really sets up a moment for dialogue between the artwork and the viewer to, again, look at this piece, very, very beautiful, and yet has a lot of very disturbing subtext that goes along with it in terms of really basically the idea of loss, the idea of being locked out. There's a lot of subtext to the piece, as there is with most of the pieces that you do. As this has just been a very, very brief look at some of the pieces. There are about 70 pieces in the exhibition. A lot of them are very large, beautiful big canvases. A lot of them are smaller works on paper. Almost all of them are three-dimensional in that they have what I like to call bits of nature attached in various ways to the paintings and the work. And we would really be thrilled if some of our viewers will later on be able to come in and see the work in person. The work will be up for quite some time. I want to thank you. I want to thank Mohammed for hosting this. And I want to thank Sam especially for being the artist who made these wonderful pieces that make us think. And I'm hoping if there's a question or two, perhaps Mohammed could help us.
Yeah, we have a few questions. And I also wanted to let everybody know that the digital catalog of the art pieces are on our website. If you go to thejerusalemfund.org, then you go to Gallery Al-Quds and go to current exhibition. There's a PDF link where you can download the PDF and take a look at all of the pieces. We do have a number of questions actually. I'll start with the first one from Zain Azam. Sam, can you explain in more detail how you create the pieces that include flowers and birds and maggots, etc.?
Sure. I'll I'll paint the surface, whether it's paper or canvas, with one color, with spray paint typically. And then I will apply one level of flora and spray paint the whole canvas or a portion of it that's relevant, and then add another layer and of flora or the bird and spray paint that and do that over and over again. That's the general thrust. There are some variations. Sometimes, if you go down to the next one, the maggot one was particularly weird because we didn't get a detail of it, but you actually see a trail of the maggot. You know, I don't generally set out to kill anything, but it did die in the process. You see a trail of it actually going along in the paint. This one, if you look at it, you see grass on it. So I actually did an imprint on the grass and then laid the bird atop it. So there's an actual texture of you know, I painted the grass around it and then put the canvas down, lifted it up, and then put the bird and used that as the negative space, and then added the additional flora on top.
Let me ask a question about the flora.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, then the flora itself, does it disintegrate? Does it disappear?
No, it usually falls off.
Mm-hmm.
It usually falls off, but on some of the pieces, it's stayed. Again, you can see the feathers here, which are more resilient, and I think you can see some of the flora on this one at the very bottom. I know in gain of function, there's at least a little bit of the flora that stayed on there, and after a while, I don't push it off. I kind of like some of it to stay on there, and if it falls off eventually, it falls off eventually.
It was a challenge to install. I tried to make sure nothing fell off.
Thank you.
We have another question from Nadia Sleman. Which piece would you say is your most politically controversial or makes a necessary political statement that politicians need to hear today?
That's tough. I guess two of the pieces that I mentioned, the gain of function, one I went into, and the Kernel of the Holocaust Museum. It's about the Nazi Holocaust in part. I actually made it like 2 days before Holocaust Memorial Day. And I have to say, I've never been to the Holocaust Museum in the United States because I view it as so manipulated and contrived. Maybe that's my own fear speaking. In contrast, when I went to Berlin several years ago for the first time, the first thing I did was go to the Holocaust Memorial there, because I feel like it's a people who are genuinely attempting to come to terms with their past, whereas the US, with their imperial record, hasn't come to terms with it. So this piece is about past Holocausts and the prospect of future ones, of nuclear weapons that Israel has and refuses to acknowledge, and the US government refuses to acknowledge them. The name of the restaurant, Bellevue, for somebody of my generation, is also, who came from New York, is also synonymous with Crazy House. You know, it was set in New York. Take him to Bellevue meant take him to a crazy house. And that's how I view nuclear policy as well. And the irony of, it's Bellevue, it's good view. And it's a tinderbox for the prospect of nuclear war. And I ended up getting detained for trying to ask questions in Helsinki because I had a little sign that I wanted to hold up. That's also in the exhibit called Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty. 122 countries backed this, virtually everybody except the US, most of NATO, Russia, and Israel. That's it. The Chinese abstained. North Korea actually voted for it. But the US and Russia fundamentally, and Israel stop it. And it's threatening humanity, and they want to be called the great powers. And they don't, and in the case of Israel, they don't even acknowledge that they have the weapons to eviscerate humanity, that they are using every day, pointing them at the head of the world, saying, do what we want or else. It's not to say that they don't use, we've only used nuclear weapons once. No, we use them every day because the US waves them around, and Israel waves them around. Other nuclear powers wave them around saying, give me this or I'm going to shoot. And now with gain of function, we're seeing they're doing the same thing with biological weapons. That people think that the genie, that's an example of the genie being put back in the bottle. It's not. The genie hasn't been put back in the bottle. They're finding crazed legalisms to justify doing biological warfare. Even the person who wrote the treaty, Francis Boyle, is saying that they're totally running amok of the treaty that I drafted. Not the U.S. implementing legislation. The treaty was passed, and it was from 1972. The U.S. implementing legislation is from 1989.
Okay, we have just two more questions for you. How do the meanings and messages discussed here by Sam come up? During which stage of the creative process?
It varies, if I understand the question. I mean, some of them, the layered pieces, the breathe and continuity of government, I think about for a long time and know very much what I want to say before I make the piece. And then there's some fortuitous things that happen, but basically, it's about artificiality of our modern existence. It's about suspension of the US Constitution and what government should be. It's the following one. It's about addiction and our disassociation from nature and how we soothe ourselves with addictive habits and how that leads to further disasters. So some of them, I think well in advance what I'm trying to say. Some of them are sort of happenstance, like the one, the scorching sun which brings them forth. I had been thinking about that phrase for years. And whenever, the first part of it is we taste the spices of Arabia, but never feel the scorching sun which brings them forth. Every time I'd go to a spice market in the Middle East, I'd take a ton of pictures because I was trying to figure out some work of art to do with the first part of the phrase. And I still haven't succeeded in doing that. But then after I created this piece, this was just another snow piece. And then it struck me that looks like the sun. If you look at a close up of the sun, that's what it looks like. So this was happenstance. And then I realized that, I made a piece about the second part of the quote that I wasn't aiming for. It just fell into place. So sometimes things just fall into place, and sometimes it's a result of, a great deal of premeditated thought.
Okay.
Can I make a small comment about that before we go to the last question? I think that one of the reasons that I was so intrigued about doing this exhibition was the fact that these works, all of them, are on the surface very abstract. You look at them, they're, as I said, they're multi-layered, they're not flat, they're not paintings, they're a mixture of painting and sculpture and collage and many, many other techniques. And on the surface, they really seem to be just a beautiful conglomeration of color and shape and form. And the idea that something like that can also have a deeper meaning that the artist actually consciously works to express by making the work is a very intriguing idea, and I think elevates the idea of what artists do, especially now when people are not being able to see art very much in real life. They're not being able to go to museums. They're certainly not being able to go to many galleries. Hopefully this will change soon. But being able to look at something and then think about it in a completely different way is what's happening right now with our situation with the pandemic, and also with the politics that we're all living with right now, on the really enormous things that have happened both in the United States and are happening in the United States, with the attention finally to racial justice and injustice and equality, and what's happening overseas as well, and what's happening in the situation with Israeli rapprochement with the Arab world, with leaving Palestine completely out of the equation. Palestine is definitely invisibly present, but visibly absent when it comes to every one of those talks, negotiations, the great peace plans. All of this can be thought about by looking at art. And that's why I think it's really, really valuable for organizations like Gallery Al-Quds, the Jerusalem Fund, to continue to present art, because we can offer a perspective that talks about these issues in the world, but from a slightly different way. Last question. Mohammed, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I lost the question. Give me 1 second. Okay, so Sam, what are you working on these days, both in terms of political subjects and artistic techniques? And this is Siddiqui, and he says hello from Paris.
Hello. Politically, I've been working on the origins of the pandemic and biowarfare. I had a piece in Salon several months ago that tried to lay out, there's a great deal of misreporting about, the prospect that it came out of a lab, and the people who are acknowledging came out of a lab are turning it into an anti-Chinese thing. So it's several layers of lies that you have to sort of parse through. And a lot of people who are pretending to, like this group, I'm currently investigating this group called Eco Health Alliance, which sounds really earthy crunchy, but I've been going through their funding, and they got a lot of positive publicity because Trump allegedly got the NIH to stop funding them. They get far, far, far more money from the Pentagon. They're a military contractor. This is a military project in terms of how they're dealing with viruses, as well as USAID money. So I'm looking at the threat of biowarfare. In terms of art, I'm continuing to do stuff, and I've got all kinds of ideas about other natural forms and other forms. I would love to, if logistics and finances allow, to go to, I got in touch some time ago with the world's leading expert on crystals. He's at Caltech, and he tells me that the best snowflakes in the world are in Corcoran, in Canada. So
yeah, I didn't know there were better and best snowflakes, but this is news to me. I like it.
There are. I have done my research. They have at 15 degrees below, you get very big, very six-sided snowflakes that should be resilient and should be preservable. So a giant canvas with thousands of snowflakes on it, as well as other visions that I hope to be able to make real.
Okay, actually, we have one final question that is actually very relevant. And is there a printed catalog, and are the pieces that are for sale, or originals or prints?
Yes, yes to both things. We have, because we don't really have much access to the gallery space, we have only printed 1 or 2 copies of the catalog, but they can be printed, and we can make that available to people. And all of the work is for sale. In the main catalog, there are prices along with it, and if anyone wants to get in touch with me about interesting work that they want to learn more about before they come in and see it in real life, that sort of thing, and talk about prices, talk about any of these issues, how to get the work, sizes, all of that. I'm happy to help out in direct contact with someone over email, on the phone, FaceTime, whatever you want to do, we can work that out. And we'd love for you to be able to perhaps have something in your own home. If nothing else, it makes some space for Sam to make a new piece. But please get in touch with us about any of these questions, because we're very able to answer them for you.
And again, to everybody watching, we do have also the digital, like the PDF file on our website. So you can browse through it, because if I'm not mistaken, it has obviously more than these that you saw today. So you can, again, thejerusalemfund.org, go to the gallery page, and on the current exhibition, you'll find a link to the PDF file.
And I can email you, anybody, if you email the Jerusalem Fund, let me know. I can email you directly the link to the catalog so that you can pursue it at your leisure.
Okay, well, thank you, Sam and Dagmar. Thank you both so much for a very nice discussion. A lot of people here also have left comments. They weren't questions, just comments praising your work. So I'll show you those later. But thank you to everybody watching as well, and we hope to have you virtually again later. So just stay in tune to our website, and again, thank you all.
Bye.